You finna get canceled. All right, let's get to this next story before you get me canceled before I even get famous. Okay.
All right. For our final story of the day, Texas teacher on administrative leave after telling students to call pedophiles minor attracted persons. This is an interesting, very, very interesting. I love calling things interesting. But I'm going to go ahead and read and then speak on it a little bit. So, a teacher in El Paso, Texas, is on administrative leave and facing termination after she told students to call pedophiles, quote unquote, minor attracted persons in an incident that was captured on video and shared on social media, according to the city's school district. There was an 18-second clip at the Franklin High School where the teacher can be heard telling students to stop calling them that. You're not allowed to label people like that. We're not going to call them that, the teacher is heard saying in the video. We're not going to call them, sorry, we're going to call them MAPS, minor attracted persons. So don't judge people just because they want to have sex with a 5-year-old. Yikes. The teacher was identified by the El Paso Teachers Association as Amber Parker, who teaches English at Franklin High School. NBC News reached out to not legally allowed to comment at this time. It is unclear what happened prior to the 18-second video or what the context of the exchange was. The El Paso Independent School District declined to answer questions on what led to the classroom discussion. The school district was made aware of the incident early last week and promptly launched an investigation, um, according to the spokesperson. And this happened, I believe it happened a couple weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so
I don't like that laugh. The same seems sinister.
uh,
Seems sinister.
I am I am the, and I know we're going to talk about this later on, but and I was actually pretty disappointed at conservatives, trying to insinuate that teachers are groomers or whatever, or partake in grooming activity. But this is the reason why they say stuff like that, right? And as a former teacher myself, like obviously I know that all teachers do not partake in, you know, these kinds of discussions or those kinds of activities. But to tell children that they shouldn't, I mean, I just don't see a situation where you are defending pedophilic behavior or trying to protect their feelings by uh, calling them something that is less offensive. For like, I want to get into MAPS, okay, minor attracted persons or people. Um, if we look at the definition or the etymology of a pedophile, the word pedophile, right? Um, pedo is what, a word. So it literally means boy, a boy child, or just a child. And then phile means word forming element, meaning someone that loves or likes or is attracted to something.
Mm-hmm.
Pedophilia itself
Pedo
means
would be in the root of pediatrician, pediatrics. Is that same root?
yeah, it's the same root.
Okay.
Um, and the definition of pedophilia is what, sexual perversion in which children are the preferred sexual object, or more specifically, a psychiatric disorder in which an adult has sexual fantasies about or engages in sexual acts with a prepubescent child. So this, to me, it's like the whole map situation is sort of like a rebranding of like what we know this thing is. Why are you trying to rebrand, like why are you trying to make it less offensive? The goal of calling someone a pedophile or addressing them as such is to shame them. And this is my opinion, to shame them, to deter them from acting on whatever feelings or whatever they got going on in their head. We clearly don't want this happening in society. We obviously, I think everyone should be working to protect children at all costs. So trying to tell children in your classroom, because they're still children, they're still minors, that all of a sudden we shouldn't be calling people certain words and we should be addressing them as other less offensive words, kind of takes the power away from, and the gravity, it takes away from what this egregious thing actually is. Because even in itself, like, okay, if you're looking at language, right off the bat, most, like, if you're not someone that English is their first language, you're not really going to know what a minor is, right? Someone that is like new to the English language, um they're going to have to look up what the definition of minor is. But everybody knows what a child is. Everybody knows what children are, or who children are. So using
Should we call
minor,
them caps? Child
what,
attracted person.
child attracted? No, I mean, what I'm essentially trying to say is, like, I just don't feel like it helps anything by calling them something other than what they actually are. Um, the only person or people it benefits are the people that engage in or suffer from that condition. And look, I'm not trying to sit here and say oh my God, it's hard for me to be sympathetic towards people that experience these thoughts or engage in these actions. It's really hard for me to be sympathetic, but I don't even want to say I understand, because that just seems so wrong to me. But I can recognize at least that, okay, maybe this is something that they can't control, and they do need to seek help, which they should. But I don't think that help should be trying to create these like euphemisms for the activity, the horrible activity that they engage in or think about when it comes to children, if that makes any sense. Like, it's part of this whole thing of like um, taking the innocence away from children, in my opinion. I don't know where that teacher, I really don't even know what mindset that teacher was in to say that, to try to correct students in that manner, and trying to say that, oh, you shouldn't call them pedophiles. No, yes, the fuck you should. You should, first of all, what kind of discussion were they having? I don't know. The article doesn't mention it. But it's like, okay, you had that, you facilitated that discussion in your classroom. What in your mind made you think that that was okay, even if that's something you believe? Because I do think that as teachers, we still have a responsibility to keep certain things to ourselves. Like, you know, I taught very young students. Like, I've my a bulk of my teaching experience is in early childhood. So of course I'm not going to I've never had those kinds of conversations with them. Um, but even if I were teaching older children, like, there's no time or space for that kind of conversation. And if a kid randomly asks that question or brings something relating to this topic up, like, I'm just gonna be like, look, this is not the time or the place. You can ask your parents about that, right? Because
Mhm.
I'm not equipped. Like, we also have to recognize that educators in any capacity, unless you are a social worker or a psychiatrist or someone that is in the mental umbrella of things when it comes to the school, we are not um, qualified to speak on those kinds of things. I mean, unless you majored in like gender studies or whatever. But even still, I don't think that school is the space that those kinds of conversations should be held, especially by a teacher that doesn't have the training and the responsibility. Like, they just don't have that to do that.
Well, if not in school, where should it happen? Just at home with the parents?
It can happen at home with the parents. I think it can happen responsibly at church. I think
But what if
other
it's not happening there?
I think other nonprofit or for-profit organizations can do whatever they can to like handle those kinds of discussions. But I really don't think they should be taking place in school, especially without parental consent.
I think you have a point about the parental consent, and I'm gonna play devil's advocate even on this. Far be it from me
Okay.
to defend pedophiles, but I'm gonna play devil's advocate because I feel I need to, because I feel like there's some nuance that needs to be
Okay.
teased out in this conversation. But let me start here before I get into the main thrust of what you're talking about in terms of what I think you're identifying as a kind of language manipulation. Um, I think a case can be made that actually school is one of the best places to have these conversations because there's an education component to it. And if we've already systematized education in general. Systematizing education about sex and sexual matters is controversial for sure, but there is an opportunity to do it in a way. Well, first of all, we have a vested interest in making sure that the general public is aware of certain realities that concern sex and sexual matters,
Okay.
including but not limited to what is and is not appropriate. So part of what you would want children to know is what is and is not appropriate to talk about at certain age levels. And
Hmm.
one way to teach that is in the home. But another opportunity is in school. Part of what makes that controversial, though, is that we have conflicts in values germane to sex and sexuality. And we can parse them kind of generally in terms of more right, religious, conservative versus more left, more liberal, more uh, um, secular. But there's definitely conflicts in terms of how sex is viewed amongst these kind of two broad families of types of people in our country. And because of that clash, it makes it really difficult to sanction educating about those matters because there's values implicated in that. And they have all kinds of implications for how you see sex, how you see sex acts, and how you interact with other people as regards sexual matters.
Hmm.
And people are understandably very protective of that kind of thing when it comes to their children. So that's part of what we're talking about, but it's not the only part of what we're talking about. So I understand people's instinct to think that, well, what we need to do is we need to educate kids in these matters so that they're not making poor choices because of a lack of education, because these things are very difficult for some parents to talk about, and indeed some
Yeah.
parents avoid these things until kids are way older because it's
Yes.
uncomfortable for them, or they don't know how to talk about that with their kids. Also, what makes this more complicated is, as a culture, we're not very comfortable talking about young children having sexual desires or urges or proclivities, even though some of them do, because it starts at a fairly young age. The ability to be attracted to other people sexually starts at a fairly young age. Puberty itself starts at a fairly young age, one. And then on top of that, as a culture, historically and generally, we're not really comfortable talking about gay or trans kids, which some people insist exist and other people insist don't exist. They learn that behavior from the uber radical blue and pink haired wearing liberal types. But like, the jury's still out on that. I don't know how young a gay person is. Like, I don't know how young you can be and be gay and have sexual proclivities that we associate with being gay, for example. Or I don't know how young you can be and experience gender dysphoria. And because I'm not an expert in that domain and I don't know, the kind of jury is still out, if I'm being honest. And I know a lot of people emphatically deny that there is such a thing as a trans child. And in fact, it is on that basis that people people declare that parents that view themselves as trying to protect their trans children are guilty of child abuse, literally, because it's not possible for there to be a trans kid. If that kid is quote unquote trans, it's because their parents are complicit in some form of child abuse. There are people who argue that. Now the jury's still out on that. I don't know if that's true in all cases. I don't know. I don't know what the youngest trans. I don't even know what's possible in terms of how young a person can be and be trans or experience gender dysphoria. Let's say. Now, all of this is coloring this controversy of what is the best way to educate kids in sexual matters, if at all. Should it be done in the home?
Typically.
Is that a good policy? Because of the factor of a lot of parents ain't doing it, and a lot of parents ain't qualified to do it. They're less qualified than the teachers are. So is that a good policy solution? Is it a good policy to have kids, young kids, particularly in grade schools, in elementary school, being educated about sex and sex matters? Either. I don't know, because there's an issue with values there, and if it's done in a way that contradicts the values that parents are trying to instill in their kids, they're going to feel some type of way about that. You grow up in a very conservative household, for example, there's a certain way of talking about sex is not going to be permitted that a lot of liberal types are going to want to talk about sex with your child about. They're talking about porn literacy and shit. But like if you're a Christian, you're not going to be amenable to porn literacy. That's going to be not only deeply offensive, but it's going to be antithetical to the kinds of values you're trying to instill into your kids. So yeah, there's going to be a clash there. I don't know if that's a good policy position either for that reason, right? And I don't know where and partly, and I'm trying to be very aware of my biases. I was raised Christian. I've turned away from it since, but probably because of that upbringing, I'm deeply uncomfortable with the idea of porn literacy to young kids. Freaking grade school, like elementary school kids. Why are we teaching them how to be literate in pornography? Well, they're not even fucking literate in just basic reading and like regular reading. Like what? Like what kind of what? Like I don't know how I feel about that. I think that's controversial at best, but I may be biased, and I'm willing to admit that.
I don't think
I
that's
have
a
bias.
biased position at all.
Well, it may be. I don't know.
There are some things that to me bias cannot touch. We know right from wrong, right? We know that kids don't need to be exposed to things at certain ages. They're not ready for that. Like
Those are controversial claims you're making.
I don't care. Like
No,
we know
not in the sense of you're going to be
kids.
canceled, but in the sense of like
No, 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 no.
it's not obviously true that it's not obvious that those are true claims.
Okay, that's fine. But I just to me, you're okay. You are correct. I do think that we as a society should responsibly really, really think about because these real things, sex is a real thing. Unfortunately, porn is a real thing.
Kids are having access to porn by the time they're in the 5th grade.
Yes, they are. These are real things, and these are real conversations that need to be handled responsibly by responsible people. In an ideal situation, if I were in charge, um, I I think that parents, if there's like a PTO or PTA, can come together, research different organizations or different people that have experience in handling these kinds of conversations. If the parents don't feel comfortable talking about it themselves, they do it in a very responsible. I prefer a biblical way of doing it, but I understand that a lot of people are not, you know, uh, do not believe in God or okay,
They don't
that's fine.
subscribe to any religion.
They don't subscribe to, any religion. That's okay. But I do think that again, this is my ideal situation. I would allow someone that, after I've done tons of research and think that they would handle the situation responsibly, I would hand it over to them and even be in the room. There's nothing. You know what? If I had, that's actually a really good idea. If I had the funds, like to create a curriculum myself and teach parents how to have these conversations with their kids. But whatever, that's ideal. Um, I just the reason why I understand that why a lot of people would think that the school is probably the best place to have these kinds of conversations. What you were alluding to earlier, because schools education is already systemized. Why not throw it in there? But what we're seeing is that there are a lot of people handling it in such a horrible way, in such a horrible manner, and not having the common sense to know that they should let parents know how they want to have these discussions with kids. At the end of the day, these are not your kids. They are someone else's kids. And you got me fucked up if you think you're going to be having conversations that I think you should not be having with them without my consent. And I think that's like handle it. If you're going to talk about it, tell the parents. And I'm not a parent, so I mean, but
Mhm.
if I were, I mean, I'm coming up on those. I'm gonna come to all the meetings, and I want to know everything that's going on because as a teacher, obviously I get to see firsthand myself.
But what
Um,
if you can you take this into account? So you have the scenario where you have young kids that are of the LGBTQ identity, or at least so it is argued, and their parents, because of their belief systems, because of how they were raised, because of how they grew up, because of the values that they want to instill in their children, are not very amenable to accepting those children as those identities at all. This is
Uh-huh.
particularly true when it comes to being trans. And so you have educators who feel a sense of obligation to create a space where those children's identities, LGBTQ plus identities that are not being affirmed at home, can yet nonetheless be affirmed, lest those children become um, vexed by suicidal ideation. And on the surface, I think that at the very least, even though there's opportunity for false positives, meaning people who misidentify children that way, or misidentify that situation. If the situation is actually if the situation is actually such as I described it, it's understandable why people would want to create spaces where these identities can get affirmed in some sense, because the children are not going to stop being who they are, or so it is argued, just because their parents or their family members at home are religious and don't accept it. What do you say to something like that? Because that's part of what makes this controversial. And I live in a place, that I teach in a place like San Francisco, where this is this is a normal occurrence to have young kids who are identifying as LGBTQ plus.
I think that first of all, I think the onus, and I understand that there are parents that can't really help the situation because of, maybe because of financial reasons, but like I think the onus is on parents here because you know what your beliefs are, your religious beliefs are. Maybe you don't agree with, you know, whatever it is that your child is telling you, but you're still sending them to a school that affirms whatever it is that you disagree with. Again, for maybe because of financial reasons, you have to keep sending your child to that school. But if you have the means, take them out, because again, I don't. To me, it's like you keep, like, these schools, these teachers say they care about the child and their well being, but like I don't know, you're still like, is it your job, is it your role to go against what the parent wants for their child? Because at the end of the day, that parent, that's still, the child is still under the helm of the parent.
But
So
that's part of what's
why do you feel like as a school you have a right to go against what the parent is saying? I
that's
don't like, personally, I like, and this is just me. I'm making I statements here. If God forbid my child, because I do agree that I do think that many people do not want trans children or gay children for that matter. But God forbid if I had a child that was trans or said they were trans,
or
I
experience
wouldn't.
gender dysphoria, genuinely
Okay,
experience
gender.
gender
Okay, thank you.
dysphoria.
Gender. If they have gender dysphoria, I'm not like, I'm not gonna be okay if I'm not, so like, actively supporting or affirming that. If I'm doing whatever I can within my power to, you know, help them out of that, because in my head I'm gonna assume that it's something that's temporary. There's a reason why this is happening. I'm gonna do everything within my power to find what the root cause is. Why would you then have the audacity to step in to then come and try to tell me what I should, first of all, what I should do with my child, and then put these ideas in my child's head to go against what I want for them? That is not
So
your place.
so part of what makes
Wait, sorry, I don't care if you're trying to provide an environment for them that you think is more inclusive or conducive for their learning and their well-being. Like, I do that at home already. And you may not like the way my child might not even like, come on, like, we both live. You say you grew up Christian. You probably grew up in a home that you thought what your parents didn't, and agree with everything you wanted. You came out fine. Like, why are we acting like
I
parents
mean, but that doesn't
not.
mean because I came out fine doesn't mean it's
Oh,
going to work
but
for everybody.
majority of people came out fine. A majority of people are
Fair
not
enough.
running around
Just
with blue and
because,
pink hair. A
fair,
majority of
fair
people are
enough.
not running around with
The
gender
majority,
dysphoria.
fair enough. But in fact, the majority of people aren't trans or even gay for that matter.
Okay. So like, and
But what about the
I might
people?
be
What about the
making.
minority of people who don't fit that? That's what I'm saying. Like we got. And I'm not. I'm offering pushback not to frustrate you. So
No,
please
no,
don't.
I'm not. This is just. I'm.
But I do think I have genuine
I'm on
pushback.
10 about this, regardless of
I
who
feel
it is.
you. I feel you. Let's talk. Let's hash it up. Let's get into it. But respect. We're gonna stay respectful because I appreciate you being on my
Oh no,
show.
no, no, no. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
want to be
And you've
respectful.
and we've by the way that you haven't even like we've been respectful this whole time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I want to say this. So part of what makes this a controversy is the contention of those typically left of center who view themselves as protecting the interest of young LGBTQ children is that what's best for the child is not in alignment with what the desires or wishes of the parent in
Parent
question
is
are. And so they view themselves as having an
saviors.
obligation. You can call it a savior complex, but they view themselves as doing something akin to that, which is creating a space of affirmation where there is none for the relevant LGBTQ plus child.
What's wrong with the parent affirming the gender that they were born as?
Well, because the contention is, so it is argued, is if they are in fact trans or if they are in fact experiencing gender dysphoria, then the parent in some sense would be in error because the parent is operating under what they call a gender binary, which they argue is inherently oppressive when the child doesn't fit that binary very nicely at all. So the in some sense, from their point of view, and I know you disagree with this, the parent is inadvertently or unintentionally abusing their child because they're not aware enough of the dynamics or the dimensions of what it means to be trans or what it means to experience gender dysphoria to give or create the affirming environment that the child needs with respect to that identity.
I am creating an affirming environment by affirming the gender that you were born as.
But
Like you, and
but that
look,
doesn't
and
align
I
with who
know
they are as the contention.
that well, I mean, what do you want? Like again, I'm coming from a Christian standpoint, so I can't argue outside of that. I mean, I could, but I don't want to. Um, like if I know that God designed you a certain way, I'm gonna try to do everything within my power to affirm the way God designed you. I don't want to go against and I if I feel like I made you, I created you, I brought you into this world. Why would I want to have a hand in permanently altering because what they're doing to these kids is permanent. I don't care what anyone says, it's permanent. Right? They try to convince us that all of this
A
is
lot of
temporary.
the a lot of
It's
the procedures
reversible.
a lot of the
It's
procedures are permanent.
reversible. It is not. Even if you could
Well,
reverse
some of them are,
all
but a
the
lot of them aren't. You're
if
right about
even
that.
if you could reverse all the physical changes that were made, which you can't put someone's womb back. You can't. I mean, you could give
You
someone
can't
fake
undo a
breasts,
hysterectomy. Yeah,
right?
There's no reversal process that I know of
There,
for
there isn't.
hysterectomy.
And even if you could, there's still that irreparable damage from to the mental, right?
Mhm,
th- I don't. I was telling someone this the other day. Me as I view myself as normal, right? Like I'm a normal
because
person.
you're straight.
Not even not well, I guess whatever, but I
That's
wasn't
controversial.
just normal. I lead a very low key life. Like I'm just normal in the sense of being normal. I'm normal, and as a normal person, I go through things, right? Like
Mhm,
I've had some traumas. I've had a parent die. I'm still getting over that. Um, so and I'm still able to like lead a normal life, right?
mhm,
Now imagine someone that is having to go through the dysphoria
mhm.
and obviously that's not normal. It's not normal to experience dysphoria in any capacity. Like,
Well, statistically, it's abnormal for sure because the percentage of the
right.
population that actually exhibits gender dysphoria is very small. So in that sense, it's abnormal for sure.
And what other sense would it be normal? or is
Well, like there's a reading of abnormal the way you're using it, where you mean it seems like you mean it like it like violates some kind of natural order, and that's the controversial thing and it seems like
doesn't it?
that's supported by some of the Christian views that you're espousing,
Even
and that's
okay,
the
even if I
controversial part.
wasn't, even if I was an atheist,
Uh,
wouldn't it still violate the natural order of things?
well, how could it if it naturally happened? So for example, like, is it
Did it naturally happen?
in what sense is a person who experiences gender dysphoria of no through no fault of their own unnatural, right? Like are you saying it's man-made or something? Like, what do you mean?
I'm not okay. I'm not saying it's man-made, but I do think there's some level of social engineering that's happening, especially with the kids today. I can't speak, so
But
I can't.
that's a bold
I
claim
can't.
though.
I
And
mean,
it's a
it is,
it's a scientifically
and this is what I was gonna
investigatable
say.
thing.
I can't speak to what I can't speak to the past, and because obviously, transgenderism did not start yesterday.
Mhm,
So I can't really, and social media didn't really exist back then when there were still people that identified as trans, or were still doing cross dressing, or all those things that they have continued into the present. Um, but
mhm,
I think I'm not. Oh man, I do believe that gender dysphoria is a real thing,
mhm,
right? And it's something that I think people that suffer from it can't really control.
mhm,
Um, However, I mean, yeah, people have to be honest and real about this, that there is an influx of girls all of a sudden wanting to transition, and boys all of a sudden wanting to transition. And maybe this it feels like an influx because it's in our faces now, like with those social media and TikTok and stuff like that. But like, I just find it really hard to believe that the frequency at which it's happening right now is the same frequency as is is the same frequency as I can't speak,
as it has always happened.
as it has always been. Thank you. So, and I do think it's part of that is a huge part of that is social engineering. I think is social media. Like, I think these teenagers, these children are looking at certain things and thinking that these are things that will help them escape whatever unhappiness that they're feeling. Look, we all went through puberty. I mean, technically, I really don't, honestly, if I'm being honest, remember mine. So it's probably very uneventful. I didn't really go through much. Again, I'm saying I have live a pretty normal life, but I can't even imagine what children are going through right now, seeing all of these things, people convincing them like, hey, if you do this, you'll feel better, your life will be better, and parents having to all of a sudden become the villain to their children because their parents don't necessarily want to affirm what they think they want. Like,
But it's not just a matter of affirming what they want. In this case, the contention is that what you would be affirming is who they are.
okay, Jason, I need you to be. I don't want you to be middle of the road, Jason.
I'm not being middle of the road. I'm
What
playing
they
devil's
you said
advocate
what they
somewhat, but
are?
I actually sincerely, so I'm articulating with fidelity what I think the view is for sure. And yeah, they're talking about an identity. That is this is what they believe for real, for real. Like, they believe that LGBTQ, these are identities. So they're what you would be affirming is who your child is as a gay person, as a lesbian person, as a trans person. That's their contention. It's not
I
merely
mean,
about what they want. It's not merely about their proclivities. It's not merely about their desires. It's about who they are.
at the moment.
No, in general. I mean, these people think of these identities as just as fundamental or foundational to a person as racial identities are. Like that's their contention. They genuinely believe this is not a plaything for them. Like for real. Like if I was a gay black man, for example, the contention would be that I'm no more black than I am gay, or at least that being black is no more foundational to who I am as a person than being gay is. So if I'm like Don Lemon or somebody, right? Like that is the contention of of people who feel this way. And I mean, on what basis would we disagree with that or argue against that? Like on what basis could we argue actually
I mean,
that
technically,
your racial identity is more fundamental to who you are than your sexual orientation, for example? Like on what basis would we argue that?
so if someone,
I mean, I'm straight. Am I more black than I am straight? Or and I would apply that to you. Are you more Nigerian than you are straight? Like, does that make sense to you?
I don't, I don't care.
Well, fair enough. But I mean,
Like,
I'm just trying to illustrate. I'm just trying to illustrate the contention.
honestly, I don't think about stuff like that. Like, I recognize that these are things that are part of
Or
my
perhaps you
identity,
don't
but
because
I
you don't
don't.
have to because you're regarded as normal in your words as a straight person. You're the default and you're the
So I
dominant
have
group.
normal privilege.
You're the dominant group. Well, you have a certain kind of privilege in terms of like your status, your sexual orientation is deemed as the default or is deemed as normal. There's no controversy associated with it. And so
Hmm.
you're not subject to the same types of
I don't have to think about it.
persecution.
I don't have to.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
That
you're giving me
that's a
the same
fair.
argument that they say about white privilege.
Yeah.
Like, white
I
people
am.
don't have to
This
think
is
about
what they believe,
what
and
we're
but
doing.
but also I'm presenting it to you. I'm doing it in a subtle way, but
Yeah.
I genuinely think they have a point, though, right? Like it's hard. At the very least, it's hard to argue against that. Like yeah, if you didn't, if you're
But
not
is it a
forced,
privilege if you can't help it? Like,
no, the privilege part comes with the fact that like the thing that's natural to you or whatever is you live in a society where no one really questions that. So you're not subject to the same types of persecution or judgment or
that's right.
pejorative
Yeah, yeah,
statements or
you're
negative
absolutely
associations
right,
as
and
somebody
I
else.
thank God
So
for
that's
that.
the privilege part. But what I'm trying to point out is that's actually a pretty, like, you citing that you don't think about those things. It's like, well, a person could say, well, you don't have to, because like we don't live in a society where straight people are persecuted like gay people are historically, right? And same with uh, cis versus trans is that's the dichotomy they would use. You're a cis person. I feel you. I saw your
Do
eye
you
roll.
call yourself a cis
I don't.
male?
No, I
Okay,
don't.
good. Do
I
you
don't.
know
I
the
don't have a need for that. But
do
the
you know the
people.
original do you know the person that created the term or coined the term?
No, was it John Money or um
Damn, I forgot his
the
name
other the
actually.
other the other the other dude from the documentary that we're going to talk about
Kinsey?
later? Yeah, it was probably one of those, but
It
I don't know
was
for sure.
I don't think it was either of them, but
Okay, then I'm wrong.
it has the same roots, like pedophilic roots.
You know what cis means? You know what it's an acronym for? CIS.
Hold on. I can't remember. But
Comfortable
I read
in
it.
comfortable in skin. You're comfortable in your own skin. That's what it stands for. I understand what it means. I don't use it, but part of it is it's not very salient to me because of the dynamics that I'm trying to illustrate with you, which is I don't really have to think about it much because cis people are the default.
They
If
want
I
us to
were
think about it.
trans, then that kind of dichotomy would
I
be
mean, just
way more salient to me.
imagine being in a society where people want you to feel guilty for stuff you don't have to think about. Like, what are we
It's not
doing?
so much. I don't know that they're trying to guilt you. Some people are, to be fair. Those are the radicals. I don't fuck with them at all. But
Okay, that's
but
what I'm
to be
talking
fair,
about.
to be fair,
That's what I'm
but
talking
some of them, that's not the point that they're making. They're not trying to make you feel ashamed for being the default. They're trying to say, take that into account when you say things like, I don't think about this. It's like,
I
yeah,
don't
but
want to
like
take
you
it
don't
into
have to
account. I
think.
don't have to. I don't
But
have to
but
take
it
that
has
into account.
implications for the fairness of it, though. So if I have an identity, if I'm in the minority, let's say my sexual orientation is in the minority, right? I'm gay or whatever, right?
Hmm.
Then I'm living in a society that views being straight as the default and being gay as something somehow deviating from that, and historically has had all kinds of pejorative associations with that. And I'm subject to all kinds of persecutions that a straight person wouldn't be subject to because of that. Then that puts me in a situation where I have to be aware of these things because I'm navigating all of the various forms of persecution that I'm subject to.
I
And
think I have an issue with the word persecution because when I think persecution, I think death, destruction, blood. tyranny.
Well, sometimes in
And
extreme
I'm not
cases,
saying
it
that.
does get that people are murdered for being trans, but that's in
Okay.
rare, exceptional cases.
Okay, yeah.
Most of the time,
I'm
people are
glad you
just
said rare.
discriminated against. People are just discriminated against. They're treated differently. They're ostracized. No one wants to date them. Those types
Discrimination
of
is a
things.
part of life.
Okay, fine, but discrimination on the basis of things you can't help about yourself is unjust, though, and that's why it's an issue, right? Like discrimination is a part of life, but if somebody discriminates against me because I'm black and they don't like black people, isn't that a fucking problem?
For them.
It's okay, but if it's sanctioned in the society, it's actually a systemic problem, which is why we
Well,
had
it's not
the civil rights
sanctioned.
movement.
It's
No,
not
but it
sanctioned.
was once upon a time
Well,
in
it's
the
not
Jim Crow
anymore. I don't
South.
wanna dwell on that. It's not anymore.
Okay, I'm just giving you an example of
No, no,
why
no,
it
no,
could
no.
become a systemic
And I
problem.
also don't
But
look,
but at the
I'm just
level of okay, wait, hold on. But I'm trying to make the point. The point I'm trying to make, and I'm genuinely disagreeing with you, by the way. I'm not just playing devil's advocate. I
yeah,
actually
yeah,
genuinely believe what I'm saying right
yeah,
now.
I know.
Right? What I'm saying is like when you have it built into the structure of your society and in your institutions and in your laws, certain forms of discrimination against people based on the mutable characteristics that they can't help about themselves, isn't
Mhm.
that a problem?
It is.
And so that is the contention of the trans community and the trans activists that we have a whole bunch of things like that
But
that
what laws
negatively
okay,
impact trans
okay.
people. But
What laws are currently in place that discriminate towards the LGBTQ community?
well, I thought we were focusing on trans. So it
Okay,
was
well,
against the
okay,
law. It was
okay, we can
against
say
the
that.
law.
Trans.
Sodomy is actually against the, it's still on the books, but sodomy was against the law in this country once upon a time. You can go to jail for for that, right?
Obviously, that's
That's an
not being
example.
like but
That's an
that's not really
example.
being implemented. Like no one's being arrested
Well,
for
yeah,
sodomy.
now anymore, but okay, you
Okay,
just
but
asked me for
I'm
examples.
okay, I'm talking about now though.
Okay, cool. So now in a lot of different states, right, there's no law prohibiting uh uh like landlords from not renting to trans people that they think are weird. In a lot of places, there's
What's
no
wrong with that?
law explicitly prohibiting, barring trans people, like trans women, for example, from going to traditionally women's only spaces.
What's wrong with that?
So, from the point of view of a trans woman who genuinely believes that they are a woman, that wants to have access to public accommodations like anybody else that comport with their conception of themselves, they would view that as an injustice, even though I know you disagree.
But you know the cool thing about America?
What's the cool thing about America?
There are like several other options, right? Like there's not just one like there isn't just one place that has one bathroom for women, right? Like you can go to somewhere else that probably would allow you as a trans person to enter into that space, right?
Sure. So, what
So
if you
why
lived in
not
a
just
place
go
where the
there?
closest place is miles away and you really have to go to the bathroom?
Well, you want to
Why
be
do you have
friends
to
so bad.
endure? See, that's the
Gosh,
thing.
that sounds so bad.
Yeah.
I'm
So that's
not
the
this.
thing. So these people, the contention is, I'm challenging you to
No,
deal
no, no, I know.
with the contention. So the contention is, it's not that I want to be trans so bad, right? It's that this
I know.
is
I'm being
what I
facetious.
am
I
through
know.
no
I'm
fault of
being
my own.
facetious.
I
And
didn't
then
choose to
I
experience
did
gender
say
dysphoria.
earlier
I
that
didn't choose to
I
have
did hold
inclinations like this
on.
where
I
I'm
did
inclined towards
say
being a woman or
earlier
whatever, or things that are associated stereotypically with being feminine. Like I didn't choose that. Like that's just
right.
who
I
I am.
did say earlier that this is something that they probably cannot help. I recognize that.
Okay. So
Um,
then should they be
but I
subject
also
wait,
think,
so should they have to drive miles away just to use the fucking
I
bathroom?
mean,
Is that fair?
sure, you have to drive
Is that
miles.
fair?
You
Is that
have to
fair?
drive. You have to drive a couple more miles to charge your electric car.
Okay. What? How's that the same? Nice try. So
I'm
let me
trying to get.
analogize it.
I'm
Let me
trying to get
analogize it.
the
Did you see the movie?
psychiatrist.
Did you see the movie Hidden Figures? Did you
Hidden
see that
what?
Hidden Figures? Did you see that movie?
No, I didn't.
Okay. So in this movie, Hidden Figures, it's about the America trying to win the space race, and there were the black women that were instrumental in helping us win the space race.
Oh,
That
that movie. Okay.
yeah. So and one of the scenes, Taraji P Henson, who plays oh man, Dorothy. Man, I can't remember her name now. Oh, I can't remember. I'll look it up. But Taraji P Henson's character that she's playing, they dramatize in the movie that um that the closest bathroom that colored people were allowed to go to, because this was during segregation, was like really 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 far away. And so they dramatized it by showing that she would just disappear in the middle of the day, and then go all the way across the campus of NASA to go use the bathroom in the only colors only bathroom, because she wasn't allowed to use the whites only bathrooms that were in that building that she worked in, because she was one of the first Black women to work in that building, and they didn't have the public accommodations for her because they lived in a time where things were still segregated, right? Like now.
Where the hell have you been? Everywhere I look, you're not where I need you to be. It's not my imagination. Now, where the hell do you go every day?
To the bathroom, sir.
To the bathroom. To the damn bathroom. For 40 minutes a day? What are you doing there? We're T-minus 0 here. I put a lot of faith in you.
There's no bathroom for me here.
What do you mean there's no bathroom for you here?
There is no bathroom. There are no colored bathrooms in this building or any building outside the West Campus, which is half a mile away. Did you know that? I have to walk to Timbuktu just to relieve myself. And I can't use one of the handy bikes. Picture that, Mr. Harrison. My uniform, skirt below my knees, my heels, and a simple string of pearls. Well, I don't own pearls. Lord knows you don't pay colored enough to afford pearls. And I work like a dog, day and night, living off of coffee from a pot none of you want to touch. So, excuse me if I have to go to the restroom a few times a day.
Right? Like now, what they were doing was dramatizing the injustice of expecting this person who they hired to do a particular job, but then like getting mad at her for disappearing in the middle of the day as if she was being irresponsible, because what she was trying to do was use the colors only bathroom and like basically abide by the segregation that was still in place. That is one example of this same kind of injustice, or an analogous kind of injustice, that I just dramatized in the case of trans people. I think that if you saw that part of the movie, you would understand why that's an injustice in the case of Taraji P. Henson, because she can't help that she's a Black person. That's not something that she chose to be. And if you can say something analogous for trans people, then I think you'd have to conclude that forcing trans people to have to be inconvenienced in an analogous way when it comes to using the bathroom because the public accommodations aren't accommodating for them is wrong and unjust.
Well,
What do you say to
I'm
that?
not in the business of. I honestly like. I wish you used a different analogy, but
Why?
I
Because
feel
this was hard to argue against?
no, because I don't like comparing the immutable characteristic of being Black to, the choice to act on your transness as a trans person. Like
You think
okay,
being trans is a choice?
even if it's not a choice to experience your gender dysphoria, you
Mhm.
still don't have to act on it. Like I feel like you don't. There are people that are gay, like
Mhm.
they know they're gay and
Mhm.
they don't sleep with. There are gay
Yeah.
men that don't sleep with men. So
Right.
you don't have to act on your gender dysphoria by transitioning to another gender. That is where I think I
But what does
absolutely
that have to
think,
do with using bathrooms? So let's say I'm a trans woman and I haven't gotten any surgeries or gotten
go
any
to
kind
the
of
okay,
puberty
go to
blockers.
the okay,
I'm not
you
allowed to
said
use the
does it
women's
have to do
restroom.
with the bathroom? Well, if you don't act on your dysphoria and transition, then you can still go to
I
the if
still,
you're
I
a
still
man, you can
think
still
of
go to the
myself as a
men's
woman. I
bathroom.
still identify as a woman, even though I haven't changed myself
But you
physically.
don't look like one, so go to the men's
But
bathroom.
that's what I'm saying. So that's what's inherently immutable though is that my conception of myself is not something that I just arbitrarily chose, or my experience of gender dysphoria is not something that I arbitrarily chose. The fact that I think of myself as a woman is a result of a bunch of things that are going on in me and in my head and in my brain that are involuntary, right? So why hold that against me as if I'm choosing these things when I'm not?
Go to the men's bathroom.
No, but can you address the challenge though? At least a try. Like I understand you're putting your foot down, but like why is it justified to have that stance given the nuances I just pulled out? Because this is what makes this controversial.
I know, I know. Um, I don't know that I can address it. I don't know. I don't know that I don't know that I don't know. I can't.
Well, then let me just say this, and I'll extend grace because um, I don't have all the answers either, to be fair, and I'm not, in fact, trans. I've been going back and forth with myself, arguing with myself about this for years now. To be
Mhm.
fair to you, so I understand where you're coming from, but I'll say this: if you can't answer that question, then it feels like you don't have a legitimate basis to have the staunch stance you have, barring trans women from traditionally women's only spaces. If you're trying seriously to take into account the involuntary nature of the experience of gender dysphoria, if you take that seriously and you don't have an answer to the question I just asked you, then it seems like we don't have a justified reason for building into the structure of our society, barring people who identify as trans women or trans men from. Well, it's typically an issue when it comes to trans women,
Mhm.
barring them from traditionally women's only spaces. Right? If all we really have is just this kind of dogmatic opinion, is that really justified? Like that's the challenge that I even have for myself, and
I,
I haven't
I
been able to
don't.
answer it. I'll let you have the last word. Then I'm gonna go back to something,
I
and then we're
mean,
gonna end it.
I I do think that it's. I still I'm gonna remain staunch on my opinion, even if I can't really articulate why. I mean, I know why. I just
Again, I'll extend grace. Maybe it's the kind of thing you just need to flush out. You need to like get it out so you can articulate it clearly. Because maybe there is a legitimate reason and you just can't say it right now, or maybe not. I don't know. But I haven't been able to come up
I
with a
mean,
good reason.
but the thing is my whole stance is that like my I mean, you're talking to someone that doesn't even think that trans is real. Like I don't think it's real. So it's not fair for me to give it any more credence than it needs. I like it's not fair to for me to be like, okay, even if you were born as a male and you transition to a female and you look like I can't tell, like, okay, well then I can't tell. So I can't personally stop you from going into a female space. I can't because you look like a woman. But I think I'm more so talking about the ones that don't, right? Like the ones that it's very obvious that they were born a male and they maybe just haven't done everything that they need to do to not look like one anymore. Like I mean I don't know. I just don't think I don't think trans is real. I don't, and I think that if you do have dysphoria of some kind, I think you just should get the help so that you don't act on it. Because I mean, the article that the pedophile article, right? They purport that there are people that have pedophilic thoughts but don't act on them.
Mhm.
Okay, so why can't there be people that have gender dysphoria that don't act on it? Then there wouldn't really need to be a need for trans. Like I
Well,
get that people don't have
gender
that kind
dysphoria is
of
not
self
a
control, right? Like I
gender
get that.
dysphoria is not a sexual orientation though. So the comparison's awkward for
What do
that
you mean?
reason. Gender
Well,
dysphoria is not
I
a
don't think I
sexual
said it was a
orientation.
sexual orientation.
No, I know that, but you're
Meaning they don't have
comparing
to,
it.
okay, what I
You're
mean is they don't
comparing
have
it.
to act on
I know
the
what you're saying, but
actual transition.
what I'm trying to account for is this particular nuance that you're comparing the experience of gender dysphoria to a sexual orientation fundamentally, and they're not the same kind of thing.
But I'm not,
So
I don't think I
saying
am. And well,
you
in my
literally
mind,
just
I don't think I am. I don't think I'm comparing it to sexual orientation.
you
I'm
literally just
simply
said that there
saying,
are people who are sexually attracted to minors or have pedophilic
okay,
inclinations sexually,
so what I'm
and they
saying
don't
is you
act
can
on it.
think
And
something.
you compared that to being to
Okay, I see
experiencing
what, okay.
gender dysphoria and saying that they don't act on it. And I'm trying to point out that they're
What
not.
I'm sorry.
I'm just trying to point out that those are not the same kind of thing, and so the comparison is awkward. Even though I understand the main point you're trying to make, which is the
You
feeling
can
a certain
think
kind of
something and
inclination
not
and
act
not
on it.
acting on it.
Okay,
Right.
that's all I'm saying. Like, okay,
But the nature of the inclinations
I
being
understand
different
that,
matters because we're not, on the one hand, we're talking about sexual proclivities. And on the
right?
other hand, we're talking about matters of identity. And those are fundamentally not the same
Right,
thing.
and I appreciate you, illustrating that because I mean sometimes we make false equivalencies, whatever. But essentially, what I'm I mean what I'm trying to say. Like you can think something and not act on it. It's going to be hard, but I do think that it's possible because we've seen it.
But how realistic is that to experience gender dysphoria and then expect them not to act on it in any way, shape, or form? Like if you're experiencing or suffering depression, how realistic is
Put on
it to
masks
expect a
every day.
person to not act on
We put
the
on masks
experience
every
of
day.
depression? Yeah, but
Isn't there something
some
called
people,
functional depression or
yeah, dude, dude, if you're clinically depressed like that, it's not realistic to expect you not to act, not for that, not to manifest itself in your behavior at all. And
it probably would.
what I'm saying is that it is just as unreasonable to expect a person genuinely experiencing particularly severe manifestations of gender dysphoria to have that not show up in their behavior at all. That's very unrealistic. I think the psychological literature on this is clear.
So I think and maybe I'm not being clear enough. I'm not saying that um when I say they should have enough self-control not to act on it at all. Okay, let me take away the at all. I think naturally, if it's something that you're suffering from that you can't control, you're going to see that in your behaviors. What I'm saying is because I mean we see men that are a little feminine. We see women that are a little masculine, right? What I'm saying is that I don't think they should go as far as to actually thinking that they can go as far as to like actually physically changing their sex or their gender
Okay, so
to the point where
there's nothing about
they do
experiencing
get banned from or
the.
don't have access to the opposite
But
genders spaces.
I want to point out something. So first of all, the experience of gender dysphoria is not uniform. People experience it in different
I
ways and to
understand it's a
different degrees.
spectrum, right?
One,
Okay, yeah.
yeah, well,
Mhm.
kind of. There's range there.
Yeah, yeah.
One, two. There's nothing about experiencing gender dysphoria that compels a person to undergo a lot of the things stereotypically associated with being trans, like the bottom
Okay.
surgeries, the top surgeries, and things like that. That's not quite how it works. A lot of times the motivations are more to do with the forms of social affirmation that one stands to gain from, for lack of a better term, looking the part a lot more with a lot more fidelity than they would naturally. And so if I genuinely believe myself to be a woman or regard myself as a woman, but because of my aesthetic, people do not regard me as a woman because I look male in various different ways, then one of the ways to deal with that is available to these people is that they can undergo various different kinds of surgeries that make them more look the part aesthetically. And then
Right.
they make more people in the social context more inclined to address them as their preferred
As such,
gender.
right?
Right. So that's one of the main motivations. It's not that I experience gender dysphoria and then I have this kind of like I'm just compelled to just like, hey, I got to get surgery because I just got to get it. Like I'm a fiend for it. It's more like I recognize that people are going to recognize me as a woman if I change certain facets of myself. So I'm motivated now to go undergo those procedures because I want to be affirmed as that identity because that's genuinely who I feel I am.
But if gender, okay, because these are the same people that like to purport that gender is a social construct, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if it is a social construct, something that we just made up,
It's not quite
why
what that
go?
means. But That's not quite what they mean by that, but
I'm being facetious, but why go to the extent of, like, okay, if we're saying that the female gender does certain things and looks a certain way, and the male gender does certain things and looks a certain way, and gosh, I want to say this right. Why go to the extent, like, if, because there are people that say that gender is, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. Gosh, I can't.
gender is
Sorry.
a spectrum. Gender is fluid.
Fluid, maybe that was the word. I don't know. But why go to the extent, like, if this is all constructed, socially constructed, why go to the extent? If you could be whatever gender you want, why go to the extent of physically changing yourself? If
Because there's all kinds of implications for how people are going to respond with respect to you in society and social context that motivate that decision for people. So
are you
that's what I tried
taking
to.
are you okay? Are you taking into account, because I mean, no, I just don't think. I think the motivation is that, okay, the body that they're in, right, is not
Mhm.
aligned with what they feel that they are.
Yeah,
So
that's part of it.
in order for them to, obviously that would make you sad or depressed. So they're chasing happiness. And in order for them to feel or get themselves out of that depression or sadness because of their gender not aligning with their physical, what's between their legs, basically, um, they feel like they have to, at some point, not everybody, but at some people feel like they have to get this surgery so that it matches for them in their head, right? But I mean, some people, when they do this, they still, you can tell that they still look like the gender that they were born as. And when people don't react or affirm them in
They're
a
not
way,
passing.
yeah, okay, yeah, thank you. They don't pass as the gender that they've become or becoming.
Mhm.
And when they see that people don't know that they pass, or don't know that, when they see that people are seeing that they're not passing as the gender that they want to be,
Mhm.
I mean, then, to me, in my opinion, the surgery would have been for naught, because the
Yeah,
whole point.
and some trans people do experience that. The gender dysphoria isn't really um ameliorated because they're still not being
They're
accepted
not
in social
satisfied.
contexts.
Yeah.
Well, part of what causes it is the fact that they're not really capable of achieving the kind of comfortability that they're seeking, what you called happiness, I guess,
Hmm.
in their own skin, because it's not, because there was an attempt that under this, the way you described it, failed in terms of them trying to conform more to it in social, to be recognized socially or affirmed as that socially, and they were unsuccessful. So now
Hmm.
the very permanent thing that they did that they can't undo didn't actually successfully
It didn't
produce
work.
what it was supposed to produce.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense why they would still feel gender dysphoria at that part, and why suicidal ideation actually in a lot of these tragic cases is something that continues after surgery, because of that dimension, for sure.
But
And
is it,
that has a lot of implications about the discourse of whether or not these procedures are the most ideal procedures to undergo, because there is an opportunity, there
I
is a
mean, clearly they're
possibility
not. It's just
that they're not gonna.
money.
Well, but there are success stories too, but there are tragically failure stories, the opposite of success stories, whatever we call
Yeah.
that. So you're not wrong to point that out. However, what I was trying to illustrate was a lot of times the motivations are not just simply about what the individual feels, although that's part of it, but it's a
Okay.
confluence between what the individual feels as it relates to how they are received socially, right? So there's a confluence between the social and the individual, or the social and the psychological, right? Which makes sense
Well,
because
aren't you
that's the
being?
nature of social identity in general. It's part the game you play as an
I mean,
individual
but
and part the game we play as a society.
you're playing yourself if you expect people to just accept you automatically when you don't even look the part.
Well, some people get
You are
immaculate
playing
surgeries and
yourself.
they look. You would be none the wiser if they didn't tell
That's
you.
and I said that earlier. Like there are some women. There's there are some people that pass as women or pass as men, and I wouldn't know that they weren't born as women or as men. That and good for them, right? Like, shoot, I'm. It's not like I'm
But they are
doing investigations
succeeding
on
with
people to
respect to.
see what they were born as.
But one of the differences I want to highlight is that they are successful with respect to what the surgeries were intended to do in
Right.
those cases.
Hmm.
And so that has going to have a bearing on how they're received socially, and in a way where they're way more likely, particularly to the unsuspecting person who's none the wiser, to be accepted as the gender that they prefer. And so that's going to have all kinds of implications for their gender dysphoria or the lack thereof. So that's one of the main motivations for doing this in the first place for a lot of them. It's not just a matter of I'm trans, therefore I can't help myself, I'm going to get surgery. It's actually way more calculated and intentional than that.
I mean, yeah, I agree with that. But I mean, for me, once I found out, like if you just so happen to be a man that transitioned to a woman and now you're a passing woman, and you tell me, oh yeah, I used to be a man, I'm gonna be like, I'm just well, I'll call your name. I won't use. I want. I just don't. I wouldn't want to use your pronouns at that point because that changes everything.
I understand. And I don't want to get too lost in the sauce with this because we can go on for this for hours, and we're
Yeah.
actually I want to preserve that for because we're actually going to talk about this topic. But I'll put a bow on this by saying part of what I was attempting to do right now in this conversation was to push you and challenge you to think about the things that a lot of people who disagree with you say. And I was trying to present it in the best light and steelman it. A lot of it I actually do agree with, and I think that they have substantive points. Some of it not so much. And I tried to be clear about when I was like genuinely agreeing versus when I wasn't.
Yeah.
If you ever have a question when I'm playing devil's advocate, please let me know. I need to do a better job of making it clear because sometimes I play devil's advocate and I'm just really convincing. If people actually genuinely believe that I believe things I don't believe, and it's
Yeah.
because I'm just into it. I'm like playing the role because of what it does for the conversation. So I'm trying to get better at that. But anyway, so yeah, I tried to challenge you to kind of think about the ins and outs of it because these are things that I actually ruminate on a regular basis because I want to make sure.
I appreciate that because I do think it's healthy to be able to see the other side's point of view, the other side's per why can't I speak perspective,
Yeah.